This is the new Royal Enfield Scram 411, and on the face of it, it looks like a Himalayan without some of the bodywork, and to a broad extent that's what this motorcycle is. However, there are a few interesting changes happening underneath the skin as well.
First though, let's talk about why this bike exists. Now Ari says that many potential customers are put off by the look and identity of an adventure bike like the Himalayan because they perceive it as being too hardcore and focused for daily life. The idea with the Scram is to make an easier, more accessible version of the Himalayan, one that will be at home in the city but also game for some exploration beyond. To that effect, the design changes have resulted in not only a less serious looking motorcycle, but also a shorter one.
Clearly, the bulk of the visual changes have happened towards the front, and what I like the most is that the headlamp is now lower and set in further, and I think that gives the bike a much better sense of proportions. It also gets a nice cast aluminium surround. Then you move over to the side and that big bulky side frame from the Himalayan is gone, replaced by two small side panels. Beyond that, there are a few other changes, but these two, that's what makes the look of the Scram.
The new single piece seat is another change, and it not only looks good but feels nice and comfortable as well. The rear section has also been reprofiled with a smaller grab handle and a different indicator number plate setup. The overall quality and finish is similar to the Himalayan, and while it doesn't feel as special as the new RE350s, it's definitely put together better than the new Yazdi Scrambler. Another area where the Scram really differentiates itself from the Himalayan is in the choice of colours, with 7 bright and funky schemes available. And then of course, there's the new offset instrument console.
This display is borrowed from the Meteor 350. It does look a little bit different around the perimeter, but it's mostly the same, and I think it's a very nice looking unit. The Tripper navigation display on the side, that continues to be an optional extra.
Now while this looks nice, there are a couple of downsides. For one, you don't get a rev counter, which you do on the Himalayan. The bigger issue with this new console though is more of a mechanical one. Unlike the Himalayan, there is no button to switch off the rear ABS. If you want to do that, you're going to have to pull a fuse out, which will deactivate the entire system, including at the front. On the bright side, that's not the Scram's only mechanical change compared to its sibling.
Here's what you need to know about the changes made to the Scram in terms of mechanicals. The chassis is exactly the same. That includes the headstock angle and the rear subframe. The rear shock is also the same. The spring is the same, but the damping has changed slightly.
While the rear suspension travel is the same as the Himalayans, the front fork now has 10 mm less travel and the spring rates are a little bit different as well. The big change, however, is that the bike now gets a 19-inch front wheel against a 21-inch wheel on the Himalayan. Moving to a smaller wheel has made some changes to the overall chassis geometry, with the steering rake angle getting a little sharper and the wheelbase reducing a little. All of these changes should result in the Scram feeling a little more agile to ride. Just how much more can only be confirmed when riding it back to back with the Himalayan, but the noticeable difference is that the handlebar requires less effort at slower speeds. The handlebar itself is as wide as before, but it is now positioned a little lower and closer to the rider. Now because of these changes, the ground clearance has dropped by 20 mm to 200 mm overall, and the seat height is down by 5 mm as well. Still, with 190 mm of front suspension travel and 180 mm at the rear, the Scram 411 is quite well spec'd as an off-road capable machine.
When Royal Enfield invited us to ride the Scram here at the Big Rock Motor Park, well, I got excited and I brought my off-road riding gear, and I'm kind of glad I did that because this motorcycle is almost as capable as the Himalayan when it comes to riding off-road.
It really does feel very similar to the Himalayan, and I rarely found myself thinking that the Scram was any less capable. The only thing I consistently missed was the ability to lock the rear tire to help steer the bike in the dirt. We got to ride the Scram on some long trails around Big Rock, and in most of the less challenging situations, the 19-inch wheel never felt like a limitation. This bike also runs the same Seat grip tires, which increases the feeling of familiarity. It was only on the slower, more tricky sections that the extra stability from a 21-inch front wheel and the additional ground clearance would have been welcome. Those situations will be quite rare unless you go actively looking for them. And if you're that sort of rider, the Himalayan will definitely make more sense for you between these two. But whichever way you go, there is no shaking the sense that this is a heavy motorcycle.
Now you're probably expecting this bike to weigh less than the Himalayan because it looks like it weighs less, and it does, but the difference isn't that big. It weighs 5 kilos less than the Himalayan, which means its curb weight should be about 194 kilos, and that's still quite a lot. Also worth considering is that the main stand is not part of standard equipment and you need to buy that as an optional accessory.
So the Scram feels a little bit different off-road, but not by a lot, and the same holds true when it comes to road performance. The big reason for that is down to the engine.
What hasn't changed much from the Himalayan is this 411 engine. In fact, it's pretty much the same. The power and torque figures are the same, the internal gearing is the same, the sprocket size is the same. And just like the BS6 Himalayan engine, it's surprisingly smooth. You can hold 90, 100, 120, even at the indicated top speed of about 130 kph, there really aren't any vibrations to be felt. The motor does struggle above 120, but 100 km per hour is a very easy, effortless cruise on this motorcycle.
As far as road comfort goes, the Scram does quite well. The suspension is set a little on the firm side, and it might even be slightly firmer than the Himalayan, but again, we'd have to ride them back to back to be sure. What is certain is that while this bike definitely isn't as plush as the X-Pulse 200 4V, it's also not as firmly set up as the new ESD Scrambler. Since there have been no changes made to the brakes, it's a similar story with a rather dull feel at the front end, and you need to use a full hand to make quick stops. It would have been nice if RE could give this bike some more front-end bite to go with its newfound urban aspirations. Like the rest of the current Royal Enfield range, there will be a number of high-quality accessories available for the Scram via the company's Make It Yours customization scheme. So, how much will the Scram cost you? Well, we don't have an exact price as of shooting this, but we'll add them in a pinned comment below.
At the end of the day, the Scram 411 definitely feels very similar to the Himalayan in the way it sounds, the way it rides, and just the general way it feels. And that is a good thing. But I think it's a nicer looking motorcycle, it is definitely more youthful, and it meets Royal Enfield's objectives of being easier and more accessible. Easier because that 19-inch front wheel does make it feel a little more agile, which will be nice in the city traffic. More accessible because it's going to cost less than the Himalayan. So, if you want to get yourself a more rugged motorcycle but you don't like the idea of going into a full-on adventure style motorcycle, that thing could be a very interesting option.